erythropoiesis. And erythropoiesis is stimulated by the presence of erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is stimulated by what? What triggers the release of erythropoietin? Think about this. If erythropoietin stimulates erythropoiesis, and erythropoiesis is the process of red blood cell production, what's going to trigger the release of erythropoietin? They're linked. So that's kind of the starting point. There's something else that's in between. So let's say that I've exposed you to altitude. Something has changed within the circulatory system. Something has increased. What would it be? Blood pressure. Say again? Blood flow. Not the blood flow. It's linked. Pressure's right. If I decrease the pressure, what goes up? In terms, what changes? You know, always think in terms of what are we carrying on the blood? Oxygen, right. If I expose you to altitude, has the oxygen concentration changed in the atmospheric air? Yeah. No. The barometric pressure has changed, but the O2 concentration remains constant. If the barometric pressure falls, it makes it harder to inspire oxygen. If it's harder to inspire oxygen, what must be increasing within the respiratory circulatory systems? Again? Lactate? Yes, go back a stage. What triggers lactate? Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Red blood cell production is not triggered by low O2. Low O2 drives up CO2. So if you expose somebody to training, any form of training will increase the CO2 concentration in the circulatory system. The CO2 is what triggers the process of erythropoiesis. It triggers the release of erythropoietin, which triggers the process of erythropoiesis. So if I go to altitude and I reduce the barometric pressure, that's the weight, or sorry, the pressure of the column of air above the individual, it's harder to inspire the oxygen. Because you're working now harder to do the same amount of work, there is a concomitant increase in CO2. And that CO2 is what drives up the process of red blood cell production. And in fact, if you take the second statement here from Ron Morn, so Ron Morn's talking about the hemoglobin molecule that sits on the red blood cell. And he's saying, well, look, it combines with O2 because that's what you want it to do. It also combines with CO2. But it would rather combine with CO2 than it would do with O2. CO2 is a massive stimulatory gas, whether it be blood-based or whether it be air-based gas. You produce CO2 whenever the cell is put under stress. As soon as the cell is put under stress, what metabolic process starts to increase? Put the cell under stress, what metabolic process? Which process increases? Well, look, what metabolic process are you using now? Yeah, metabolic. You're working aerobically or anaerobically at the moment? Aerobically. So if you suddenly jump up and I'm stressing on the cell, what metabolic process must start to increase? Anaerobic. You guys need to go back and learn some first year physiology if you're struggling at this point. If anaerobic process starts to increase, the byproduct of anaerobic metabolism is CO2. The point behind that, lactate. Lactate is in response to the increase in CO2 production. byproduct of it. If you have continual exposure to CO2, that will trigger erythropoiesis. And so that is why hypoxic chambers are used. So hypoxic chambers are where you decrease the ambient O2 concentration from, say, 20.93 down to about 16%. So you're taking in less oxygen. Because you're taking in less oxygen to do the same amount of work, what happens to the CO2 concentration? It increases. That then triggers red blood cell production, and you get a physiological adaptation. How many of you have seen the film A Few Good Men? Yeah? A few of you? Not many. Okay, you need to go and see it at homework. Okay, it's a great film. Actually, no, it's a shit film, but it's got some great moments in it. Jack Nicholson is brilliant, okay? But there's a bit at the beginning which is absolutely fascinating. They kill a soldier right at the beginning. They kill the soldier by putting a rag down his throat. And suffocate him. And they kill him because he goes into hyperlactemic shock. Hyperlactemic shock is whereby you have excessive lactate concentrations in the blood. Excessive lactate concentrations in the blood are caused by excessive carbon dioxide, which in his case, he couldn't expel. Okay? All right. The molecule that you see on the right is the hemoglobin molecule. So what you've got are 4 globin chains, which are the coloured configurations. Sitting within those, you've got the heme groups, which are these little blue discs, and each heme group contains an iron molecule. And this is why iron is often considered to be incredibly important in terms of aerobic capability. Because the heme group attaches to the oxygen. I'll rephrase that. The oxygen attaches to the heme group. The heme group also allows us to attach CO2. And this is why one of the things that you can measure is somebody's SpO2. And the SpO2 is the SAT, how saturated the circulation is with oxygen. You can never have 100% O2 saturation. Why? You can never have the blood 100% saturated with O2. Why not? Okay? It's not toxic. Think about it. If it was 100% saturated with O2, what would you say you're not producing? Carbon dioxide. And yet, what are you producing? What are you seeing here? CO2. You demonstrated it last week when you measured VO2 at rest. You got a VCO2 score. You cannot have 100% saturation. Okay, so I get very pissy when we had paramedics in here a couple of years ago because somebody had a slight accident, something like that. Idiot. Did a maths test but forgot to have breakfast. Nothing serious, just fainted. So they put the SpO2 thing on. Oh, it's 100% saturated. Bullshit machine wrong. It's not true. It cannot happen. You've just told me that guy is a freak of nature because he's not producing CO2. You just found the ultimate endurance athlete and never produces CO2. Amazing. Come on. So what you're looking at is for an SpO2 of about 98%. That's the normal SpO2. You're about 98% saturated, 2% CO2. Even under extreme exercise conditions, when I say extreme, I'm going to, let's go back. Yeah, okay, I'm going to call it extreme. Say VO2 max. You wouldn't expect the SpO2 to fall anything less than 96, 97%. It's only when we really start to starve the circulatory system of oxygen that you would expect to see it to fall. So a great example of the guys that do breath hold diving. Anybody seen breath hold diving? So it's where you dive to whatever depth you're going to dive to in the ocean on one single breath. The world record, I think, now stands at 150 meters. But think about that, it's actually 300 metres. You've got to come back up. And that's about 7.5 minutes on one breath. Okay, now let me be clear. This is not that stupid stuff that American woman does, where you sit on the advert. She says, "Oh, I'm a world record diver." Of course you are, love, because you stand on a platform that sinks, and you go down, so you haven't used any energy, and then you swim up. Now, what I'm talking about is swimming down, coming up, one breath. So they did a study down at Imperial, and they wanted to look at what happens to the amount of O2 on the blood, how saturated it is. So all they did was they got the guys to take a single breath, maximal breath, and they immersed their faces into cold water, into a bucket of cold water. And then they put the monitor, which is just a Doppler, it's just an infrared Doppler on your finger. Bearing in mind it becomes clinically significant, that is, we start to really worry if the score drops below 85%. By 5 minutes, they've got down to saturation scores of about 52%. Now that is significant because now you've got CO2 in the circulation. But that circulation is going somewhere quite important. Where will some of that CO2 be going to? Coming from the muscles, maybe it's coming, but circulation is going everywhere. It's going to the brain. If you get CO2 into the brain, one of the conditions we know is a condition called rupture of the deep. Rupture of the deep is where you get excessive CO2 on the brain, which affects your ability to make decisions. That's why the breath hold divers die. Because they get to 150 meters, high CO2 on the brain, and forget where they are. Never come back up. Or if you've had people using nitrogen cylinders, they've got the nitrogen mix wrong, CO2 concentrations rise, and they've been known to actually take the whole face mask off to drown. CO2 absolutely impairs your decision making. Absolutely impairs it. So knowing the SATs is really quite important. Okay, Beck's going to